Hey guys, thanks for being here. I have Sarah Elaine Smith with me, and I'm super excited. She was born and raised in Greene County, Pennsylvania. She studied at the Missioner Center for Writers, UT Austin, where she got an MFA in poetry, the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she got her MFA in fiction, and Carnegie Mellon University with a BA in English and creative writing. She's worked as a metadata analyst. She signed an NDA, so she can say no more than that. She was a college teacher, a proofreader, copy editor, design consultant, waitress, and ghostwriter. Her work has received support from the McDowell Colony, the Rona Jaff Wallace Foundation, and the Keene Prize for Literature, among other generous entities. She's the author of the novel that we're talking about today, Marilou Is Everywhere, from Riverhead Books. It just came out in 2019. And it's a story in which one girl goes missing and another tries to take her place, but discovers the consequences of abandoning her own life. She's also the author of I Live in a Hut, which was the 2011 winner of the Cleveland State University Poetry Center's first book prize. And her work has appeared in publications like Fence, Jubilant, Tin House, and Gulf Coast, among others. I am so excited to have you with us today, Sarah.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, so I was creeping on your work, and I noticed that Michael Schaub from NPR said something about your work, and he said, fiction debuts this accomplished don't come along very often at all. And Marilou Is Everywhere proves that Smith is a writer of immense talent and rare imagination. I agree. Her voice is nothing short of angelic, and this novel reads like a miracle. And I am really interested in the voice in this novel. And I want to talk more about this voice and how you nurtured it.
Yeah, that's a question that I've been asked a bit actually on tour, and it's one that I don't always know how to find my way into, because for me, I really try to just like listen, like the writing process is trying a whole bunch of stuff out, waiting for something that feels alive and like magnetic and surprising even to me while I'm writing it, and then just tuning into that and listening to it. And so I wish I could say like that I constructed it, that I sort of like went to my lab and I thought, okay, I'm going to make it a little bit more like this and a little bit less like this. But it's really like Cindy's just a person that I like listening to. And while I was working on the book, I tried to get better and better at emptying myself out and just listening to what she would notice and what she would say. And one thing that I think kind of goes into that too is like not trying to judge her or edit her. And that's something like whenever I think people maybe call their writing poet, might be some of what they're describing, is that she'll describe something in a kind of unusual way. She'll use a word that isn't really like the word that we've all agreed to use to describe a certain thing. And it's like next to it or adjacent to it, but it's just like a little bit wrong. And leaving those wrong things in is, I think, a really crucial part of her voice. Like, this is something that I actually used to teach a lot. Like on the first day of my fiction classes, we would read the last sentence of The Great Gatsby, which is like a beautiful sentence by, all accounts. What is it? I never remember it. It's like, we beat ceaselessly into the past. It's one of those like classically beautiful fiction sentences. And one of the first assignments I give my students is like, wreck this sentence, like retain the meaning, but make it sound just awkward, horrible, stupid. Like do something, overdo, underdo, like do something to take the sentiment here and just like break it in all of these little ways. And the reason for that is that every time you read one of those sentences, there's like a whole person there. There's a whole character there, like the way that somebody's language doesn't work or doesn't work the way that you expect it to can often be an indicator of their mind and like why they're different from other people. And so that's something I suggest to everyone. If you're writing something and you're sort of feeling like, you know, like it's not dialed in, or it's not like a specific character yet. To see if there are any of those things that you're trying to edit out, or that you're telling yourself like, oh no, that's wrong, I have to take that out, because sometimes that is where the, you know, like the sort of texture is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so I'm wondering now about the actual editing process. So, of course, when you're structuring the book, it sounds like you were careful not to over edit that voice.
Yeah.
Did you ever get into a situation with the editor or the publishing house where they wanted to cut certain things and you were like, it's got to stay?
Not that much on the sentence level. I really just love and adore my editor, and I appreciate so much that she did an amazing job of sort of holding me accountable for things making sense, but has a lot of appreciation for like the wildness of the book. And
Mhm.
so most of, I think really almost all of her edits where she was like, this is maybe like a little bit too rich, you know, I would be like, yeah, I see it. And I actually was taking out things like kind of the whole time. Things, my ear has been changing as I get older, I guess, where I like plainer language now than I used to. And so I went back and took out a lot of stuff that I was like, this is just a little too gooey, it's too showy. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? It feels too like full of itself. And so a lot of her edits were just really good notes in that way, where she was helping me like take it away from the place where it would maybe distract. And that's something that I personally dislike about writing that's like pretty, is when it's distracting and it sort of keeps you from the character. So yeah, she let me keep a lot of crazy stuff. And you know, like there's a part early on where they're in like a convenience store slash grocery store, which is a thing we have a lot of in Greene County where I'm from. And Cindy is going around and writing things in the dust that are on the lids of these cans, and she writes the word babies all over them. And even while I was writing that, I was just like, that is quite strange, like I have no idea.
That's
You
weird.
know, yeah, I was just like, okay, Cindy. And you know, anytime that I read that section, that I've read that section on tour, I have this little moment of marvel, like, how everybody let me get away with this. This book has like been read and edited and proofed by so many people, and everyone was like, yeah, that seems about right. And
Well, it does, and that's the interesting thing is I think the way that you let the character sort of run wild, I think that is the difference, and that's something I think a lot of people who are listening are interested in because I think there's a big difference between creating a character and making it do what you want versus sort of letting it live.
yeah, I think that's really important. And I think you can tell, you know, and like I've done that character creation exercise that I feel like it's like a staple of creative writing books and like classes and stuff, where it's like an inventory of questions that you fill
Mhm.
out about your character. And I've always just had a really hard time getting an actual person out of that. And I don't know why that is, but I think like I was just reading a book this week called Story Genius by Lisa Cron, and it's sort of like the log line is something like, you know, using neuroscience to write compelling fiction.
Hmm.
And one of the things she talks about that, and she talks about how like you think that those things are going to get you to like a, I don't know, a substantial place with the character, and they kind of don't. Like they're actually more superficial questions than they seem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like the way that somebody talks has always felt a lot more personal to me, or like a lot more indicative of something kind of deeper within them about where they're coming from or what they want, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting too, because that's the way we speak is also a reflection of the way we think, the ideas that we have, the sort of makeup of a person. Whereas these sort of questions this creative writing activity kind of reminds me of the Facebook surveys that you might do, like, what's your favorite color? When's the last time you cried? And that's a part of a person. Like, you can get an idea, but you don't get the whole thing of it. And I'd love to hear, like, what this journey was like. I mean, when you started writing Cindy, did you know it was going to be a novel, or what was that process like?
Yeah, I did. I was like, I'm gonna write a novel, damn it. You know what I mean?
It was like a Tuesday. You're like, I'm doing it.
Yeah. Like I'm swinging for the fences and like, you know, I don't know how to do this at all. And so my process was to write 1,000 words a day for 90 days because I'm just like a like extremely disciplined person. For whatever reason, that is one of the qualities that helps me do this thing, is that if I tell myself I'm going to do this, I'm just going to do it. For whatever reason, I have that like thing in me. And that's the way that I usually approach stuff that I don't know how to do, is I break it up into chunks of something that you do every day. And I'm just like, well, I'm going to do it every day. And I don't know how that's going to end up with this thing being something I can do, but I trust that the discipline of doing something every day will teach me eventually. And that's usually been true for me. Although that is like a really labor intensive way to write a novel if you don't know how to write a novel. But
Well, did you plan it from the beginning? Like, are you one of the novelists, like, with your whiteboard and your Post-its?
I wish.
Yeah,
Seems great, you know? I
I
wish I
don't
could
know.
do that. Like I haven't figured out how to do that yet. And maybe I will at some point. But you know, I just really could not figure that out for the life of me. And so my process was a lot more to like create this like primordial ooze, this like hundreds of pages of I don't know what, and then to go back in later and find what was really alive in it. And like that is actually, I made an online course about this same process. It's called Here Be Monsters, because it's like kind of like, you know, the way on medieval maps that whenever there's like a territory that no one's investigated yet, instead of going there, sometimes we just put like like a lion or like a beast of some kind, and we're like, there are monsters there, we can't go there. That's kind of how I feel about discovering like the material that really resonates for me, is that I have to go into the unknown to get it. And that's what happened. Like I wrote 1,000 words a day for 90 days. And the resulting document was like a novel, only in the sense that it contained enough words to be a novel. That's it. That's it. That's all I was going for. And I was fine with that. And when I reread it, I found this little 30-page chunk that had Cindy and her brothers in it. And it's a section that is almost word for word exactly the way it was in the book. It's maybe one of the only things that has stayed the same through every single draft. It's the scene sort of toward the beginning where they're trespassing and they go into this pond to bathe and to like fish and stuff. And I don't remember writing it. So it was like kind of a gift. It was almost like my gift for doing all of that work and dealing with all of that uncertainty. And so that's how I found it. And it's, like I said, it's a time consuming and sort of labor intensive way to discover that, but it also seemed like some way of bypassing my sort of inherent like editing self and judgments to get to something that I really, really felt in my heart. And so that's sort of what the course is. The course, I mean, it's like a series of 90 emails that you get from me, which each one is sort of like a pep talk or an idea of where to start today, or a question that might send you, in the direction of that stuff. And just because that's like the only way that I know how to write.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting, and I know you have an MFA in poetry and fiction, and I'm wondering how those play with each other. Because, I'm also a poet, and when I think about a novel, right, it's like this huge, it's uncharted territory. Like you said, there's a monster there, and how do you go in that?
Yeah. Well, so the way that I write poems typically is one draft. And I feel like that's like you're not supposed to say that or whatever. I remember in school, like a lot of the time, the assignment at the end of the semester would be like a portfolio where you show your like revisions. And so sometimes I would sort of backtrack. I would like have the poem that I wrote in one
Yep.
draft. Yeah, I would go back and be like, let's make that kind of stupid. Because like for me, writing a poem is almost like the sitting down, like the container of time where I sit down and I think about those things. And so it's almost more of like a meditative practice to me than like a thing that I labor over. And that's also just like reflected by a lot of the poets that I like. I really like Bernadette Meyer, like people who have this, it's like a freeness. It's sort of like, instead of revising the poem, I'll just try again tomorrow to like find my way with something different. So obviously, like nobody can write a novel that way. That
Right.
would be nuts. That would be, I mean, no. I won't say nobody can because someone can. It would be amazing.
I think people have, but I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
how that would work. And it sounds like this document that you came up with after the 90 days, I mean, it's not something you could just send to an agent, right?
No. 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 It's not something I would show to anybody. It's it's and here's what's funny. I was talking to a friend about this just a few days ago. She was saying like, people say that and I don't really believe them that like it's that bad or like that the writing is that bad. And I thought about it and I was like, the thing is that the writing sentence to sentence is not bad, but taking the whole thing as a story that makes sense, it is like deliriously nuts. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it's like not, it's like barely even a story. And like that's the way in which it's bad. It's not like the individual sentences don't make sense. It's like if you were trying to read it start to finish, if you excerpted a paragraph, you would be like, I don't believe you, this doesn't seem that bad. But if you took a 10-page chunk, you would be like, none of these characters are in the same place. I don't know.
So what
Like
do you do after that? So after you went back and you found this, you said this little chunk that became the scene in the book where they're at the lake, I think it is.
yeah.
What did you do then? So you sat with it. What came next?
Next, I did my whole process again, my whole 90 days. Yeah,
You
I
did
did.
was a starting.
Yeah, yeah, I started with that because I was like, okay, these are the people. And I don't totally know what's going to happen to them or how this is all going to happen to them, but they're my people and they're really interesting to me and I really care about them. I don't know that much about them and I care about them. And so I did the whole thing again with isolating them as the characters and that place is the place. And so it was still really messy. You know what I mean? It was still really messy, but I kind of got closer and closer to it. And I did a few drafts like that. And I'm also like a pretty fast writer, so that's part of why this works for me, I think. And the reason that I did this, like the whole reason is that poetry mindset is something that's so strong in me that I needed to find an override. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
otherwise, like when I'm writing a poem, I don't go on to the next line until the line I'm working on it seems right and it seems like it's coming out of the one before that. And I kind of write short stories that same way, and it's possible. It is possible to write short stories that way. And it's like it takes a little bit longer, but I feel like my second draft is like somebody else's fourth draft practically. You know what I mean? And so it works for those two things. It had worked for me so far to be that kind of like to go by feel and to not move on until it felt right. And for a novel, it was just not going to work. And so this pattern was the override button, and it needed to be pretty much like that in order for me to like let go enough to see what else could happen. And so it's like it's definitely not everybody's writing style. And and it might not even be mine forever. It might change. I'm working on something new now that like I did that first wild, messy draft and I did that second, slightly more concise draft. and it feels a lot closer to me because I think I have like a better sense of how you really do, like your story really does need to be about something. It really does need to like organize itself. But yeah, that's what the process of trying to write a novel with like a poet's brain was like for me.
And so after that, what were the next steps from that point, like from your finished draft to when you got it published?
So I'm really lucky. I had an agent already, and that is because, you know, agents come to places like the Iowa Writers Workshop, and you know, they just like you sign up and you can talk to them. And this is like really seriously one of the great benefits and privileges of being a student at the workshop, that like people will just kind of like give you a line of credit with like, okay, maybe your work's interesting, I'll take a look at it. And it's never like a guarantee. It's not like everyone at the workshop gets signed. You know what I mean? It's like it's not like in the bag or anything, but it is way easier than all the other ways. And so I can't speak to those ways at all. And so yeah, I know that a lot of this process for me was like radically different in that it was so much easier because I had this great agent from the beginning. And my agent is like big into like reading the work and sort of being like a first editorial voice before it goes out, which is also not, maybe doesn't work for everyone, works great for me. And she read a million drafts of this book and really helped me get it to a place where it was a lot closer than it would have been if it had, you know, I wanted to sell the book like I think 2 years before she was like, okay, now we're gonna do it.
So how long, what was the whole process from the time you started that first 90-day experiment sort of to when your agent submitted it out?
A lot of that was I would send a draft to her, she would read it, and she would give me really in-depth comments about, you know, I think that this is really working. This is the place where I don't really get, you know, where I'm still getting confused, and this is another place where here's what I'm getting, but I don't think that's what you're intending, or you know, just like really good editorial letters. And I would give it another shot, you
Mhm.
know. And I wrote more drafts, new drafts, kind of like a tennis player smashing a tennis ball back over the net, like just like, okay, here it is. Like I just did that like just insanely, just like a maniac. And at the time I was working a full-time job. I was a contract worker in the Google building, not a Google employee. I am contractually obligated to not misrepresent myself as a Google employee. People always laugh when I say that because people are like, dude, I don't
It's
care.
the
But
same. Like,
they're unionizing now, which is super cool. My former coworkers, all of the contract workers at Google are unionizing. It's
that's
awesome.
awesome, but also that's crazy. So that was like a 9 to 5, or what was that like?
Yeah, that was a 9 to 5. And the only reason that I could write while I was doing this job is that it happened to be in the Google building where they feed you breakfast and lunch. And so, like, my care and feeding was largely underwritten by Google.
Awesome. So you didn't have to worry about cooking, what to make for breakfast.
Yeah, that stuff is really serious. That is a really serious gift of time. And so I would do all of that. You know, I would work, I would go to the gym. I would like attend to whatever obligations I had in my community that evening. I would usually get home around 8 or 9, and I would write for like 2 hours and go to bed and wake up at like, you know, 5:30 or 6 and go to work. And I did that for years. And like I've forgotten about that. I've kind of like just forgotten how much work that was.
That's intense. I'm like a little bit, I'm like, are you okay? That's a lot of work. Like, first of all, just waking up at 5:30 in the morning is a lot.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It sounds really, I'm just like, that sounds unlikely now,
It sounds
but
like you were really dedicated. Like you said, you're determined. You were like, okay, this is what I'm doing. Was there ever a moment where I always hear about novelists getting to a point and they're like, this isn't working, I want to give up. Did that happen for you, or were you just like, I'm going straight ahead?
I mean, I did have some moments where it's not like it all totally fell apart to me. I've had that happen with short stories where it's like I've changed too many structural things and it just loses it's like I carry it home in a bucket and I'm like, I don't think I can help you anymore. But that didn't quite happen. But I wrote the ending so many times and I just couldn't find it. I just couldn't find it for a long time. And that makes sense. The ending is so important. You know what I mean? Like, it really is, like, it's the other part of the container that the book is in, and the container is the meaning of the book. And
Yeah.
it matters so much. And like, I really wanted to punish Cindy. That's why I wrote so many endings. I wrote some really dark endings for her. And it was because I felt like I had this responsibility. She does something really awful, and I thought, well, I have this responsibility to punish her as the writer. And that just kept on not feeling right, you
Yeah.
know? Um,
What
and
does those
so,
punishments look like?
oh man, I mean, like, she killed herself in a bunch of them, which
Oh,
I
wow.
feel bad saying.
Oh, like, I didn't expect that one.
In some of them, in a lot of them, she was like a slightly older, like a present day adult version of herself telling the story retrospectively. And in the present day, she had a child, or she was like a fully fledged, like, responsible person. And in various ways, she was like kind of beginning to skate on some of those responsibilities and sort of like almost begin empathizing more with her mother, who just wasn't there, like why a mom would want to leave. And like, that would have been a great book too. I really think that would have been a good book too. But the way I was writing it, I was really just, oh boy, just like throwing a lot of suffering at her. And that wasn't the right ending. And sometimes I just thought, like, I really wanted to write like a cool book. And to me, those cool books are like merciless and dark.
I think this book is pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking about here, but I felt like, oh man, the cool people, they write these books that are just like so heavy, and like the blurbs are like unrelenting.
Yeah.
Like whatever. And I just, like, that's what serious fiction is, and I want to write serious fiction. And I kept thinking, like, man, maybe I'm just too much of a wimp to write it. You know what I mean? Like, maybe this is something wrong with me, that I don't have the backbone to be that writer. And whenever my editor is telling me, like, I think you should go in this other direction, like, the fact that I don't know, and I'm like, I guess I'll try it, like, that was something wrong with me, like being too indecisive. And so I really internalized that. It didn't ever feel to me like, oh, this book has all of these problems. It really felt to me like, I don't think I'm the strong enough person who can do this. And it turns out that actually I'm really grateful that I was a little bit more egoless about the revision process, because the like incorporating the things that people reflected to me every single time when I look back at it made the book a million times better. But that was a real leap of faith at the time. And so I did have a lot of those moments where I was just like, I'm just not one of these cool writers who can write these like insanely dark books, which I know is funny because this book is not dark.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Like, it actually is dark. But when you think of like cool writers, who were you thinking of? Like, what novels were you thinking
Like Atessa Moshfegh
of? Mhm.
primarily, who I
You know, it's
really love.
funny. I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation right before I read Marilou Is Everywhere. I
Mhm.
was like, I need a really good book, and I'm so glad I happened upon Marilou Is Everywhere. And what is, when you were writing, is there anything you wish you knew while writing this novel?
Oh gosh. Maybe like I think I taught myself, or I learned a lot about the structure of story while I was writing it. And eventually, actually, when I was trying to figure out the ending, another thing I did was I read a lot of screenwriting books,
Hmm.
a lot, and they're so helpful. I mean, I recommend this highly to anyone writing fiction because, like, on the one hand, you think, well, formula is like kind of not what I'm going for. I want this to be singular and exciting. But I think that story is just story. It's like this sort of beautiful, mutable thing that runs through every narrative thing that we love. And it's not that different in Law and Order SVU than
Right.
it is in, like Madame Bovary. I think a lot of, and I realize a lot of people would disagree with me about that, but I think it's true. I think what happens next is something that it's almost like a creature that we've evolved this kind of symbiotic relationship with. And the things that would have made it a lot easier that I wish I had known were just that, like, there are ways of paying attention to that specifically in the story that they don't necessarily have to do with plot or voice. You know what I mean? It's more about like what the characters are doing, what the actions that they're taking show about them at these different stages. And it's kind of like the secret skeleton of the story. And so it just took me a long time to figure out how to make those changes because at first, oh boy, like I just write these like huge chunks of like memory, dream, description of landscape, and nothing's happening. Nothing's happening, and that's sort of like my tendency as a writer. That's the thing that I always have to be aware of about myself and kind of work against it a little bit. And thinking about story and how people change, how, like, what they want and how they change. I feel like that might have saved me some time, or maybe there was no way to save myself any time, which is also probably true.
So what does happen next? What are your next plans for writing?
So right now I'm trying to write a screenplay version of Marilou Is Everywhere.
That's
Not that anyone
awesome.
asked me to. I
Well, I was gonna ask who if this was a movie, who would you have play the characters?
you know, I'm not sure if I'm like if the ages of all of these people would be right, but I feel like Storm Reed would be a really good Jude character. If she were old enough by the time that the movie started. You know what I mean? Like a little
Mhm.
bit more in like teenage time, but I think she would be great. Um, I've always sort of imagined like Angelica Houston being
Oh,
Bernadette. Yeah, and but there are a lot of like fantastic actresses who are just like, who I think would be really amazing. But I feel like she would be a lot of fun. I don't really have anyone in mind for Cindy because I almost feel like Cindy would be really great for it to be someone who isn't like a face yet,
mhm, like an unknown, yeah.
yeah. And like actually someone asked me this question for like a blog where they have you write like a little treatment of what you think your book would be like as a movie. And I said for that I think Virgil and Clinton would be played by two like HVAC repairmen who just happen to be there on the day that they're casting, who are real life brothers and like haven't acted in anything. And
Yeah.
I feel like that is just totally right. Like that's who I
Oh
would,
yeah.
yeah.
So is that your vision? So with this screenplay, what do you do? You're just approaching it the same way you did the novel?
hmm Yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe more than most people, I have like a tremendous sense of I'll just figure this out.
Mhm.
I will figure it out. I will Google it. I will get the books. I will try and I will figure it out. And like, I wonder what that's from. Like, I know it's not everybody's like default setting. Sometimes I wonder if it's because like I'm an only child. And so the idea of like, I don't know how to do this and it's just me here. So I'm just going to start trying to find out. I'm going to start looking up the answers to these questions. Or if it's maybe something, I had this really great English teacher, Mrs. Hatfield, in middle school and high school. The book is dedicated to her, actually. Yeah, and she was really good at teaching us how to teach ourselves how to do things. She was the faculty advisor for the literary magazine and the newspaper. And I remember, especially in the literary magazine, sometimes we just didn't know how to do something layout wise or something technical about how do we make this set of pages into an actual book. And she would just pull out the manual for like InDesign and be like, well, let's just sit down and figure it out. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm just reading a bunch of screenwriting books, and some of them are not that useful because they're like, what is character? How do you do character? And I'm like, no. Like, yeah, how do I do? Some of them just give the same kind of advice that I feel like a lot of writing books have, and it's not screenwriting specific. And so, I'm still in the very early stages of this, but like I'm listening to a bunch of screenwriting podcasts that have been really helpful, and reading all of these books and just starting in whatever way makes sense to me, because I think starting is really hard. Starting is the hardest part. And part of my, I don't know, my technique to like break it down into everyday chunks is to be like, okay, the decision of whether to start or not, I am taking off the table.
Yeah.
I'm going to start. I'm not going to wonder about it. I'm not going to think, should I be writing today? I'm going to just do it. And then I will learn from what I've done and sort of refine it. And so that's one thing that I'm working on. And I have a second novel that is, I'm going to start on the third draft soon. And I feel really excited about that. It feels like its own thing, and that was some advice I got actually from a lot of people. If you can possibly start something new while you're waiting for your book to come out, like it will help you so much, because then you won't feel like, oh my God, I need this book like to do well. I need everyone to love it. Yeah. And so I'm working on this new book that is like totally different. Super strange, just super strange book. Like another book where I keep writing things where I'm like, oh God, okay, but it's great. And it takes place in the desert, and I'm going to work on that. Those are the two main things right now. And also for right now, I'm trying to like, I like working a lot, and I am, like I've said, really like, just, I don't know. I can get myself to do a lot of work. But right now I'm also trying to take a little bit of time off. I just came back from the second part of my tour, and like I haven't accomplished very much except for like putting away my clothes and doing my laundry. Like, and I'm trying to just sort of let that be enough for a few days too. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. And I mean, how do you feel about the difference between writing a novel and like touring for your novel?
I mean, they just couldn't be more different, like they're just such totally different things. Hi, Katso. Who's this cat?
She wants to be famous. Her name's
Yeah, she should be. She's a cutie. What's her name?
Michiko. Like,
Michiko.
have you read The Great Fires?
I haven't.
It's really great. But yeah, his lover was Michiko.
Oh, Jack Gilbert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes, I do. I was thinking fiction first, but yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far for your next book, are you going to? Does that mean you get to go to the desert for some time?
Yeah. I've actually already spent some time there last winter. My boyfriend has a cabin in Joshua Tree, and like we drove out to California and stayed there for about a month last winter. And I was working on this book, and like I never realized that I was such a place-based writer. Never thought of myself that way, and like kind of didn't know what people really meant by that even. But it occurs to me, like working on the second book, something that's similar that I would have never expected of myself is that the place where it's happening matters a lot to me, and being really specific and like being kind of like writing from the experience of being in those places is really important to me, and it has some kind of power that I don't know how to describe. Like I don't think I could. I don't know what it is exactly that there's like some residue of it in the book. Somehow you know that it's from that place. Yeah. And so we're going back this winter, which is great because, I do have to do this revision. And so yeah, I'm going to do that and like have a few things on my list to specifically check out while I'm there. And I love the desert. I'm sort of surprised by it's not some place that really has a lot in common with where I'm from. Although I was realizing when I was on tour last week, I was driving through the upper Midwest, and there are these stretches of northern Iowa that are kind of desolate.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? They are
Yeah.
spacious in sort of the same way. And my dad is from Storm Lake, Iowa, which is like all the way up there. And a lot of my family is from that part of the country. And I thought maybe I do have some of this in my blood because there's something about the just continuity of space in these places that feels really exciting to me.
And where are
Yeah.
you living now?
I live in Pittsburgh.
Okay, interesting. So that's
Yeah.
so you guys are driving to Joshua Tree again.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. Yeah. And I love driving. I really do. I didn't always love it, but like maybe about 5 years ago, I quit drinking. And for some reason, that was like one of the big personality changes that I got early on, this like love of driving. Um, and somewhat maybe because it's kind of like another way of emptying out.
Mhm.
It's like a thing. It gives my surface brain enough to do, like, because there really is always something you have to do. You have to keep your attention focused in a specific way. And because of that focus, it like gives me enough up here to deal with that it lets everything else kind of empty out. And I just love that. Um,
And it seems
so
kind of
yeah.
similar to writing as well.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. I think it really is. It's a very sort of like discursive process. And so, it's just, and it's like a tempo for seeing things that feels really nice to me. Like where you see landscapes change, you sort of like, um, we were we were talking about this the last time that we drove out there, how there are these like moments where you see the first indication that you're in a different place. When you're driving from Texas into New Mexico, all of a sudden you see something that you think like, now I'm in a different place. Or like when you drive into Joshua trees only live at this one elevation. They
Mhm.
live in just such a specific set of circumstances that there's like a boundary to where they'll live and where they won't live. And so when you're driving into that area, there's always a first Joshua tree that you see. You know what I mean? You always sort of feel aware that you're entering a new place. And like, I guess maybe that makes sense about why I would like that so much, because it is like a way of seeing these granular, specific things that change like while you're leaving one place and going into another.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are writing this, are you also working full time or are you writing full time?
Oh, yeah, I quit my job.
Yay!
Yeah, I know. And like whether that was like a great idea or like a horrible
Great
idea
idea.
remains to be seen. I feel like it's been pretty great for me. Because of the discipline and the structure,
Mhm.
I think I've managed to set up my day so that I get a lot of things done. And it has let me do more to tour for the book than I might have been able to do otherwise. Like um my publicist is really awesome, and she's like, I'll set up if you're going to be traveling someplace anyway, let me know, and we can set something up for you. And so I feel like I have the opportunity to do more of that than I would have. So really want to take advantage of it and just go to as many places as possible. And like to get back to your previous question about tour, I mean, it's really fun. It's really fun because I still kind of can't believe that people I don't know have read the book. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like I see people holding it and I'm like, where did you get that? Like not in like a, give it back kind of way, but just like,
It's
how
pretty,
did
it's
that
kind of a
happen?
big deal, right?
I I I I don't know. And I'm happy not knowing.
Yeah.
Very happy not knowing. I'm happy like to not give myself too much of an invitation to think about that stuff because
Yeah.
I already have a tendency to do it and it can be very like preoccupying. And so I'm just like never going to read Goodreads again. And it's not going to ever
Nope.
look at it again. I'm never going to read the Amazon reviews. Um, you know what I mean?
I
But
think
it
that's
seems
good
like,
advice.
yeah, yeah. It seems like people though are having like connecting with it, which is the just what a joy that is. And the thing that I love the most about going on tour is the Q&A, which surprises me because I sort of went into it being like, okay, I have to get ready for this Q&A. And I have, like my
What's the
my
weirdest
first
question someone asked?
um people, a lot of the questions are just like amazing because I would never think about them, and they're like really sweet and observant. And like one of my favorites, somebody asked me like, there are a lot of times when Cindy sort of like sums up a lot of stuff by saying and things like that. And
Mhm.
like what do you think she's up to when she does that? And like that was truly a fun question to answer because I did not have an answer for it. And I was like, oh gosh, well, and that was like a really fun question, really nicely observed. And then like, honestly, nobody's asked me a question that I felt like I had to defend myself against. And that's what I thought that was going to be like. I thought it was going to be like hardball and I would be like, have to like really defend myself from people. And, like, that's just not been the case.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as when we write something, when we produce something, we expect maybe some type of backlash, but it sounds like it's not there. And maybe that's not the thing. I imagine people coming to your reading, people who want to interview you, they genuinely care about the work. And I think that's probably exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is totally exciting. And it's just really like, I don't know, it's just very touching to me. And really, I really enjoy it. Truly. It's like a humbling thing. It's a very humbling thing. And yeah, so far that's just been a lot of fun. And it's also fatiguing to be traveling around, like, and I kind of so far have a little bit underestimated how fatiguing some of those things would be. um but it's it's part of that, from what I've heard from other writers. That's like part of the deal, the exhilaration, and then also the like constant, what time is my train? When
Yeah.
am I supposed to be at this place? What am I supposed to do again? Who am I talking to there? What's their name? Just like a lot of detail recall. But
It's a lot. And so we're getting closer to the end, and I think you're sending me a Spotify playlist, right?
that's right.
Of
Yes.
your, so I'm gonna post this below the interview. But do you have any final words of wisdom for people who are watching this and who are thinking, oh my God, I want what she has?
You can get it. That's my main, like I this will sound funny coming from someone with 2 MFAs, but I don't think MFAs are it. I don't think they're the final word. And I think that one of the best things that an MFA can do for people is to give them access and make that a little bit easier. That truly, that's a thing. And then the other thing is to put you in orbit with other people who are doing this so
Yeah.
that you see somebody who's kind of like you and you think, they did it, I can do it. And I think that that's what really matters the most. And so like I say that just because, you know, I think that everybody has an amazing novel in them, and I want to read everybody's amazing novel. And um, the specific process that works for me might not work for everybody. And I don't want to discount the fact that like it, I'm sure, has made it easier for me to have this sort of like, you know, like the Iowa Writers Workshop like thing on my CV. But I really think that everyone, like the process of sort of seeing what you've written and seeing what's going on with it and then trying something else and responding to it, I think that that's the actual gig, you know. And that's something that sometimes people, I think, leave MFA programs and they're sort of like dumbfounded that, well, I just have to write now.
Yeah,
That's
what
part
do I
of the
do?
joy, right? Like, wait a minute, I thought something else was going to happen. And like, no, dude, you just eventually you just have to figure out how to get the writing done. And so I want to say that that's the case. And there are a lot of things, a lot of stuff that I've learned about writing. I've also learned in books about writing. There are a lot of things that I've taught myself. And you know, I think the feeling of like the feeling that other people somewhere might know more about how to do something, or they just might like innately have that, um I don't think is so true anymore. You know what I mean? And so I hope in whatever way that can be empowering to people. At the end of the day, everyone just has to write. And at the end of the day, that's always kind of hard in the same way for everybody. And so, you know, I would say to people like, don't wait to be qualified in whatever way you think legitimizes you, because any writer, nothing qualifies them except for writing. And so happily, like that's available all the time.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. That's brilliant advice. And I think if anyone wants to buy the book, I will post information on where to access it below. But this was super fun. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a blast. And, you know, I'm just really grateful to get to talk about these things with you.
Yeah, thank you.